World during modern age. The history of India is divided into ancient, medieval, and modern periods. This was done to show that the society, economy, politics, and culture of each period were different from those of the other periods. This year, you will learn about the modern period of Indian history, which began with conquest of India by the British in the 18th century. Sources of modern history. The abundant sources of information on the modern period can be divided into two categories: primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources include literary sources like government reports and archives, literary and artistic evidences like books and paintings, and archaeological remains such as monuments and artifacts. Printed books. Because of the invention of the printing press during this period, a lot of books, both in Indian and in foreign languages, are available, which throw light on various aspects of Indian life. These books also throw a good deal of light on the progress made by man in different fields, such as medicine, engineering, technology, art, literature, history, mathematics, music, dance, drama, and so on. Government documents. India is a vast country, so in different parts of the country, different powers played their parts. All these rulers and powers exchanged documents with each other. By these government documents, we can easily know how different powers dealt with each other and how ultimately the British overpowered them one by one. They help us to know the true nature of the British imperialists and economic exploitation of this country by them. Thus, these government documents are an important source of the history of modern India. Newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, etc. We also get a lot of information about the modern period from a large number of newspapers, magazines, pamphlets, etc., which were printed in different parts of India, in different languages, by different people. Historical buildings. We can still see many buildings scattered throughout the country, especially in the big cities, which relate to many stories and episodes linked with them. Some such buildings are the India Gate, the Central Secretariat, the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Parliament House, the Birla House, etc. All these buildings are not only our national wealth, but they also throw a good deal of light on different aspects of architectural achievements of India. Other works of art. Various statues and rare specimens of paintings are not only important as works of art, but they also tell us something about the physical features and achievements of the national leaders and great historical personalities. The chief among them are films, which throw a good deal of light on the contemporary people and their way of life. The impression which they leave on us remains quite permanent because we see the different events happening before our eyes. Letters written by great personalities like Mahatma Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru, etc. also give us a chance to understand their personalities, way of thinking, and their relationship with other people. An overview of the 18th century. We, in this book, begin the history of modern India from the 18th century because many of the changes that are characteristics of modern times can be said to have begun during this period. These changes first began in other parts of the world and came to us under conditions which were not of our choice, as our country had gone under foreign domination. However, the life of the people in our country has been deeply affected by these changes. Some of the features of the modern era, such as industrialization, great progress in technology, growth of cities, and greater interaction among nations, are said to have begun in the 18th century. India in the 18th century was in a chaotic political state. The Mughal Empire, which held the country together for several centuries, had become weak. The country was breaking up into small independent kingdoms that constantly fought with each other. This disunity finally led to the colonization of India by the British. So, the economic and political progress that took place in Europe came much later to India. Before we turn to the story of India's decline and recovery during this period, we shall state here in brief the main trends of changes that took place in the world. Many of the changes which have brought in the modern age first began in Europe. Renaissance and its effects on the people of Europe. Renaissance literally means rebirth or revival of learning, which began in Europe. It was the revival of Greek and Roman learning. Renaissance started in Italy and spread to all other parts of Europe. It inspired people to think for themselves, to reason, and also to challenge the established customs, traditions, and institutions which they thought were harmful to them. The scientific temper that developed through Renaissance led to new inventions and the discovery of new lands. This movement also made the people conscious of the rights of every individual and gave them the confidence to raise their voice against the corrupt practices and autocratic authority of the medieval church. This movement against the church is referred to as the Protestant Reformation movement. This period also saw a steady growth of trade and commerce, which in turn helped the emergence of new towns and cities. Cities like Milan, Florence, Rome, Venice, London, Paris, etc. were set up either on the coastal areas connecting sea routes or on both sides of the land routes, which were used for trade. The rich merchant class emerged in the wake of flourishing trade. This class was neither the high aristocratic class nor the producing class. It became the middle class and was later joined by doctors, lawyers, teachers, and other professional classes. With increasing wealth and knowledge at its disposal, the middle class became the most influential section of the society. It supported strong rulers and was protected by them. New states, free from feudal control, were formed. New schools and colleges were opened, which cultivated an atmosphere of learning and education. All the developments that took place in the medieval period proceeded gradually to lay the foundation of modern period and marked the onset of the new age. It was followed by birth of democratic institutions through revolutions in America and in France, and the Industrial Revolution in England. The Industrial Revolution. In the medieval period, people adopted the domestic system of production. Craftsmen and artisans produced everything by hand in their own homes. Every village had its own carpenter, potter, weaver, blacksmith, etc. to fulfill the needs of the people. The village economy was thus self-sufficient. The people did not have to depend on the outside market and used whatever was produced in the village. But as the demand for goods increased, these handmade local goods could not satisfy the needs of the people. The raw material available in the village was not adequate to increase production. So, a new method of production was adopted, which was known as the factory system. Under this system, rich people set up factories, invested their money to buy raw materials in large quantities, and employed workers and artisans to work with the help of the newly invented machines. In this way, the domestic system was replaced by the factory system. Goods produced by hand in small quantities were soon outnumbered by machine-made goods manufactured at a rapid pace. This new technique of production, which brought about drastic changes in the economy, is referred to as the Industrial Revolution. England was the first country where Industrial Revolution took place. By 1750, there were many new inventions in England as a result of the scientific spirit inspired by the Renaissance. The spinning jenny, invented by James Hargreaves, the water frame, invented by Arkwright, the power loom, invented by Cartwright, and the mule by Crompton, were some of the machines which brought about tremendous changes and increased production in the textile industry. Inventions of the 18th century. The Industrial Revolution began in the textile industry. Large quantities of cotton were imported from India. To spin this and weave the thread into cloth, new machines were required. Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin, which helped to separate seeds from cotton 300 times faster than by hand. He was the first to use mass production methods in his arms factory. The invention which symbolizes the Industrial Revolution is the steam engine of James Watt. It could be used in any kind of machine. In 1814, George Stephenson made the first locomotive rocket using the steam engine. With this began the large-scale construction of railroads, which improved the transportation of people and material. Improved macadamized roads and canal systems made travel cheaper. In the 19th century, telegraph and telephone helped to improve communication. The blast furnace helped to process iron to steel, which could in turn produce better machines. There was a revolution in agriculture with new farm machinery such as the steel plow and the mechanical drill. The discovery of new sea routes led to a tremendous growth of trade. Factories, big machines, steam and electric power began to be used for production of goods. These replaced the old cottage and village industries. Craftsman's handiwork and manual labor were also substituted by new techniques of mechanical production and its management. All these changes took place during the Industrial Revolution. Rise of capitalism. One of the most important results of the Industrial Revolution was the rise of capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system in which production and distribution of goods depend on private capital, wealth, and are controlled by few persons, called capitalists. In due course, the capitalists made profits for themselves, and the workers or wage earners were deprived of their share in the profits. Imperialism and colonialism. The rise of the Industrial Revolution in Western Europe led to a demand for raw materials and markets for finished products. This led to a race for colonies. Why was this so? The reason being that England and the other European countries were small and were not able to satisfy the demand for raw materials. Also, the market for the finished products was small. This demand to look for alternative sources led to colonialism and imperialism. Imperialism comes from the Latin word imperium, meaning power. Imperialism is the policy of extending political and economic control over a weak country by a powerful one. This phenomena gained strength in the 19th century, largely due to the Industrial Revolution. The pursuit for colonies increased during the 19th century. Countries of Asia and Africa began to be conquered by the imperialist powers. The governments of these countries were weak and unable to resist the powerful Europeans. The improvements in transport made the spread of imperialism easier. In course of time, the whole of Asia and Africa was divided among the imperialist powers led by Britain, France, Belgium, USA, and later Japan. The end result was that by 1914, almost the whole of the non-industrialized world had come under the control of a few industrialized countries. The conquest of Asia and Africa. The conditions that favored imperialism in India and Africa were lack of industrial revolution. Economically, these areas were very backward, militarily weak. These countries could not face the new powerful weapons of the Europeans. Absence of strong nation-states. Strong nation-states did not exist in Asia and Africa. Absence of middle class. Middle-class people led revolutions and motivate the people to face any challenge. But there was lack of middle class in these countries. Consequences of the Industrial Revolution. The consequences of the Industrial Revolution can be divided into three categories. They are economic. The Industrial Revolution led to the decline of feudalism. Farmers were turned into landless laborers and became unemployed. Many were forced to go to the cities in search of jobs. The result was that the cities became overcrowded and problems of housing, sanitation, and health started to arise. It led to the rise of capitalism. It is an economic system where the means of production and distribution are owned privately. The main motive of the owner is profit. Social. Two new classes emerged. The factory owners, also called the capitalists or the haves, were the rich, and they controlled money. The capitalists became richer and more prosperous. They led luxurious and comfortable lives. The other class was that of the workers, or the have-nots. The condition of the workers became worse. They were made to work for long hours and were paid less. The workers led a miserable life, got only a hand-to-mouth salary, and often lived in slums. Political. The demand for raw materials and markets for the finished goods led to an increase in sea voyages, which in turn led to the discovery of new lands. It led to colonialism in the Asian, African, and Central American continents. Colonialism means when a country loses its independence and is ruled by another country. That is, the country is controlled politically and economically by another country. The countries first to establish colonies were Portugal, England, Holland, France, and Spain. With the increased power of the colonial masters, it led to the growth of imperialism. The socio-economic life of the people changed in Europe and the colonies. Later, socialism emerged as a new economic system due to the Industrial Revolution, and it was popular among the workers. It was the opposite of capitalism and wanted the means of production and distribution to be in the hands of the state and not owned privately. The profit was to be shared equally by all. The American Revolution. In the later half of the 18th century, there were revolutions in America and France, which were different from the Industrial Revolution. These were political revolutions. That is, through these revolutions, the people wanted to assert their rights against exploitation and change the system of their government. The common masses of America and France wanted to set up democratic governments which would provide equality and freedom to all. Once the continent of America was discovered, the Europeans here settled in its different parts. The French settled in the north, in Canada, the Spanish in the central part, and the British in the eastern part of America. They drove away the native Red Indians and settled in 13 colonies. The British government, however, exercised its authority over these people and ruled the colonies with the help of British governors who did not care much for the welfare of the settlers, as new taxes were imposed on them one after the other, and the settlers protested. They felt that since the British Parliament did not have any representative from the colonies, it had no right to tax them. They raised the slogan, "No taxation without representation." By the 19th century, the writings of English and French philosophers like Thomas Paine, Voltaire, Rousseau, Montesquieu, etc., made them conscious and determined to have their rights. When a new tax was imposed on tea, in spite of their protest, some colonists disguised as Red Indians entered a ship in the Boston harbor and threw the chests of tea into the sea. This incident is known as the Boston Tea Party. But the government in England did not pay any heed to the protests made by the settlers. War and conflicts started between the British Army and the colonists. Finally, on 4th July 1776, the people of the 13 colonies declared themselves independent. The Declaration of Independence was framed by Thomas Jefferson. It is one of the most important documents as it declared that every individual enjoys the right to free himself from oppressive rule. The British government tried to suppress the revolution. Inspired by the new ideals, the colonists fought undaunted and gained their independence from the British rule. The 13 American colonies joined to form the United States of America. A new constitution was written, including the Bill of Rights. This was the first constitution in the world to guarantee freedom of speech, thought and expression, and equality to all its citizens. The American Revolution, also known as the American War of Independence, had a great impact on the oppressed people all over the world. The French Revolution. Inspired by the success of the American Revolution, the French too revolted against absolute monarchy in France. The French society was divided into 3 classes called estates. The first estate comprised the clergy or officials of the church, the second, the nobility, and the third, the commons. The condition of the third estate was miserable. The people of the first 2 estates did not have to pay any tax. The entire burden of administration and other government expenditure was borne by the commoners. The rulers and the clergy enjoyed all the privileges and led a life of luxury at the expense of the common people. A strong middle class led the common people to fight for their rights against oppression. Philosophers like Rousseau, Voltaire, and Montesquieu openly challenged the French monarchy and encouraged the people to think on their own. In July 1789, the French rose in revolt, and their representatives declared themselves as the National Assembly. They broke open the state prison of Bastille on July 14, 1789, and were joined by the prisoners. This symbolized the fall of absolute monarchy and the victory of the people. The National Assembly adopted the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen, which guaranteed various rights to the people of France. France was declared a republic, and the property of the nobility and the church was confiscated and distributed among the common people. The King and Queen of France were tried and executed. Liberty, freedom, fraternity, brotherhood, and equality became the guiding principles of the people of France. Growth of nationalism. The growth of nationalism was a significant development in the 19th century. Nationalism is a modern concept. People living in a particular territory, belonging to the same racial or ethnic group, sharing a common history and culture, speaking the same language, consider themselves as one people and share a feeling of oneness. They feel a sense of belonging to one nation. This is known as nationalism. By the 19th century, feudalism had ended in most parts of Europe. There was a steady growth of trade and commerce and development of towns and cities. People living here were influenced by the spread of new learning and ideas. Rich merchants supported strong rulers who protected them. People sharing the same economic and cultural background united under their own rulers. Thus, new nations based on national unity were set up. These were called nation-states. In many areas where people were divided, a national struggle for unification and independence started. Thus, in Italy, Germany, Poland, and Greece, people launched movements to remove foreign rulers and were able to set up a government under their own rulers. A strong sense of nationalism and loyalty to a national ruler was now possible. These successes inspired other nations to unite and fight for their independence in other parts of the world. Rise of socialist thought and Russian Revolution. The Industrial Revolution divided the society into 2 main classes, the capitalists and the wage earners, or the haves and the have-nots. The capitalists controlled the production and monopolized profit. The wage earners worked in factories, did not enjoy any share in the profit. Since the main motive of the capitalists was only to make more profit at the expense of the workers, the life of the workers in the capitalist society was miserable. Their plight and hardships gave rise to trade unions and other organizations which were set up to fight for the rights of the workers. Many philosophers preached new ideas to improve their condition by setting up a classless society. The theory and ideas of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels had tremendous impact on the people. They criticized the capitalist society and by the middle of the 19th century published the famous book Das Kapital. Their ideas, now known as communism, were expressed in a scientific way. According to them, all means of production, that is industries, land, agriculture, farms, etc., should be controlled by the society for production, and the profit must be equally shared by all. They also said that a few capitalists were controlling the means of production and making profits, leaving the large number of workers in a deprived condition. They felt that one day workers were bound to revolt against such a system. The ideas of communism spread like wildfire and inspired the oppressed workers everywhere. Lenin led a successful workers' revolution in Russia. The Tsar was overthrown and the first socialist republic was set up in Russia. The rapid spread of communism posed a threat to the capitalist countries. After the World War II, hostilities between capitalist and communist countries continued and caused tension. This situation is known as Cold War. The need for an organization to maintain peace and security in the world was felt, and the United Nations organization was set up for this purpose. India and many other countries are now actively working for world peace through the UN.